So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and today we are going back to a regular battle replay as opposed to a custom scenario, and this one was actually sent to me way back in June, shortly after I began that hiatus of mine when I was moving house and job. So this is trying to clear some of the backlog that was sent to me when I wasn't able to do it, and that's before I sort of forget that they're here. And this one in particular did stand out because it also is on a map that we haven't seen before, at least I don't believe so. I think there was a variant of this map, I think, that was a pure field battle at one point, or at least very similar, albeit these Mordor-inspired ones all tend to look fairly similar because of the terrain and the architecture, I suppose. But this is going to be pretty much a cityscape, I would suggest. I mean, there's not a huge amount in the way of structures. It's a lot of ruins and then the citadel at the back and a few choke points, but still a 3v3, and it's an evil civil war, really. There is technically a good lined faction, but this is at least something that can be explained away. And Mordor are actually on the attack as well, so I assume there was a bit of a rebellion within Sauron's lands, and the loyalists are here to try and reclaim this dusty little corner and make sure that his lands are unified ahead of the march on the Free Peoples of Middle-earth. That's what I'm saying anyway. Obviously all of these are a little bit more fast and loose when it comes to what's actually going on, but I mean, orcs fighting among themselves, or largely a host of orcs fighting among themselves, is certainly not something that's out of the ordinary. It's a little bit in the way of human architecture here as well, so I'm sure there's a place in Mordor that I can name this after. So this was also sent to me by White Dolphin. It was the first of a pretty long series of replays, actually, he did send me. We've seen a couple already, but this was actually the very first of the bunch that he did send across. So like I said, before it fades away from my site, I did want to get this one done before that happens. So we'll go through the attacking armies first and foremost, starting off with the first of Sauron's loyalists trying to reclaim this little patch of turf. We have Tintin, who's playing as Harad. It was brought to my attention as well that the Mümakil, actually, you don't go into the red limit after getting just one. That was something which completely passed me by, so this is actually completely within the realms of possibility for Harad to field a couple of units of Mümakil. I mean, when you're in a siege situation, they can be really effective, because as soon as the enemies start to show signs of falling apart, if you commit a unit like this or other really high mass units, something like the Drake Broodlings for example, then you can really make a mess of your enemy lines, and then if they can't regain their cohesion, that's often where the attackers can come good, and that is exactly what I imagine the Mümakil will be used for in this battle, or at least attempted to do so by Tintin. But of course, because they do have that very significant weakness to certain anti-cavalry damage, especially pikes, and also the big targets that they are throwing projectiles are very effective against them as well. It can make them fairly easy targets as long as the defenders are organised, have their ducks in a row defensively, and their lines are kept reasonably healthy. So we'll see. There is also the question of the archers that they can deploy from their backs as well. We've got the Haradrim Spearmen. Of course, Harad is certainly not a faction which lacks for numbers when it comes to being on the offensive. A couple of units of them, I mean, obviously they're not going to be the best in terms of quality, but we could see the same sort of thing with a couple of the defensive armies as well. So yeah, the Haradrim Spearmen will be doing that role that they always do of being the cannon fodder for Harad. Southron Archers, Harad are not really well known for having a super extensive archer line. Southron Archers are really just going to be here to engage the enemy again though, when it comes to some of the defending armies. Not necessarily are all of them the strongest in terms of their skirmishing potential, at longer ranges at the very least, so the Southron Archers could still be a rather successful annoyance in that regard, but we shall have to wait and see. We also have the Muhard Beast Hunters, spears in melee, javelins from afar. Obviously javelins are one of those things that Harad are well known for, and exactly the sort of thing which can be very, very useful when it comes to trying to storm a settlement such as this. You do pay a little bit more for them than the likes of the Orc Javelins and the Snaga Skirmishes, but then they are a more well-rounded unit in general, so again, that little bump up in terms of quality could be exactly what you want, and they don't really skimp in terms of numbers either, with 203 of them per unit. Southron Pikemen, they can be pretty good. I mean, their low stats and their low defensive abilities often means they do melt away a lot quicker than you would like, but the fact they do have armour piercing is a distinction among pikes which is shared only by the mighty 1st Legion from Khazad-dûm, albeit they are a far more well-rounded unit, so they very often perform very well. Not often the case with the Southron Pikemen, but if they can be properly supported by the rest of the Harad infantry, this is what they will be using to try and anchor their line in place. A couple of units of them. Just in behind, more Muhards, the Muhard Berserkers, this time the entry-level shock infantry unit for Harad, not only from range but also up close. Harad are well known for having a good amount of armour piercing. This is the most basic instance of an aggressive unit of armour piercing infantry, and they come with all of the downsides that you would expect. Very low, next to no armour in fact, from the Muhard units, but armour piercing for a relatively cheap outlay, and against the right kinds of units, among which there are going to be plenty for the defenders, armour piercing can really punch above its weight. We also have the Serpent Guard, again following the theme of Harad, not putting quite as much stock in their defensive prowess as, for instance, the Western Kingdoms of Men, slightly lighter in terms of their armour, but they do have a little bit more about them in terms of bite in melee, and also they're fairly numerous, which is not too uncommon for units such as this now in the latest version of the game, but it is still significant because having 203 of them is very, very handy. No armour upgrades on them though, so they're not able to mitigate that slight weakness when it comes to their defensive abilities. And then at the back we have all three instances of the Trollmen, which again is not surprising. This is the pride and joy really of the Harad infantry force, all of which being armour piercing. The Trollmen, which are effectively a berserker unit really, albeit they do have a shield which it sets them apart a little bit. They've been involved in this game ever since Vanilla Third Age after all, but they do need that shield because without it their defensive abilities against arrow fire, because of the next to no armour once again, would be a problem. So it does help bolster them in that regard. We have the Demons of the Desert, which are one of the most, if not, well, in terms of damage dealing potential, the most devastating unit of javelins in the game because of their ability to knock units over and hit several units with their projectiles. So very, very nasty indeed, but a little bit more fragile than the other Trollmen, but still capable in melee, but certainly not as capable as the mighty Champions of Nafarat, one of the scariest units of armour-piercing shock infantry in the game. Third hit point, really, really powerful in terms of their ability to deal damage, and will certainly be one of the units that the defenders will be on the lookout for. Second army, we have Ding Da King, who's playing as Rhudaur. Etenmore's Troll Hunters are here. Once again, another javelin heavy faction with an armour-piercing focus, and again, a faction which maybe lacks a little bit defensively, so Rhudaur and Harad may be very far apart geographically, but in terms of their style, very, very close. The Etenmore's Troll Hunters are a little bit tankier than the Muhards that we've already seen, however, but then they are also going to be a little bit more expensive and less numerous, so there is that. Bit of artillery as well from the Barbarian Catapult. Again, on this kind of settlement, it can really depend on where the defenders decide to put their units as to whether the artillery can be useful or useless. They'll have to wait and see. If they do get clear sight lines though, it could give them a good amount of map control just by its presence. It doesn't necessarily have to do a huge amount of damage on its own. More Etenmore's Troll Hunters, again, in terms of the relative quality, the Vranadine Pikemen are going to be far superior to the Southrons that we have already seen. Very, very nice unit indeed, especially considering they're shielded. I think they were the first shielded pikes that was added to the game quite a long time ago now, and they always perform really, really well for Rhudaur, and they do need that kind of unit to help anchor them in place. Same reasons that Harad would find pikes useful, but Rhudaur are often a little bit more successful at this sort of thing. Again, perhaps their western and distant Dunedain heritage makes it so that they do still retain a little bit of that defensive style of warfare. A very efficient unit as well in the Rhudaur Swordsmen, over 203 of them, so they have even more than the Serpent Guard, though this is an instance of where the Serpent Guard individually are going to be of higher quality than the Rhudaur Swordsmen, but you could argue the relative costs make the Rhudaur Swordsmen maybe the superior unit, depending upon what exactly you're after. In this sort of situation where you're trying to storm a settlement, the extra numbers and extra cost savings you can put into other things could be considered to be better, and of course you can have a lot of them with their hexagonal shields. In the back we have the Vranadine Berserkers, a very deadly unit of throwing axes, albeit they don't have a huge amount of ammunition at range, but they do still count as a bodyguard throwing axe unit, of which there are only 3 in the game, I believe. I thought it was only 2 in the last replay, but I forgot about the Vranadine Berserkers, to be fair. And the Witch-Roman Slavers with those tridents, again acting as a halberd, very, very powerful if you can get them into the right sort of position. The rest of the Rhudaur army will be hiding. They do have a fair amount of units that can hide after all. And finally the Warlord, who is going to be playing as Mordor in an attempt to win back Sauron's territory. The Temple Guard, seen them in quite a few replays recently in a custom scenario sense. Obviously armor-piercing archers can be very, very useful. A little bit more difficult to manoeuvre them when you're on the attack, but to be fair, because of their multifaceted nature as being a very strong unit in melee as well, I wouldn't be too worried if I were them. We've got the Olag High as well, trolls. We've seen them be very, very effective in their new guise several times already. Temple Executioners, strong unit of two-handed swordsmen. Melkor's Abominations, which is going to be useful because other than the Mümakil we haven't seen any mounted units for the attackers, and just having these fast movers could pen the defenders up in their position if they had any cavalry of their own. We'll wait and see on that front. Orc Javelins, so more javelins, all of the attackers buying into them. I mean, it's less of a factor in Mordor's roster overall than their allies today, but still very effective. We've got the Nazgul here. If they can be embedded in the rest of the Mordor army, they can really be the silent killers that can ratchet up a very impressive kill count for themselves over the long haul. Uruk Archers, similar story really with the Southron Archers. They're going to be here to just try and engage with the enemy. None of the factions on display thus far have really been archer-centric, albeit Mordor do have some specialty units in that regard. The Morgul Chosen, very heavy unit of spears. They're going to be useful for locking down that front line and attempting to really sort of do that slow burn assault. Armour piercing could be a problem for them, we'll have to wait and see. We've got the Troll Drummers to keep all the units pointing in the right direction. A very key unit could be the Blackguard of Barad-dûr as well. It's not the biggest amount of territory they have to recapture, but if they can force their way through those initial lines, again, similar manner of disruption as the Mümakil, albeit it's a little bit easier to pull off with the Blackguard of Barad-dûr in this sort of situation, I think, but they're obviously going to have nowhere near the kill ceiling that the Mümakil do. So again, it's the trade-off that you have to have. Orc Fodder to help bolster the numbers, 3 units of them in fact, so that's going to give the Mordor army a very numerous look to it, and then 3 units of Uruk Halberds as well. So an interesting army this. There could be a couple of hidden units as well. Moving on to the defenders, we have a large blob over here under the command of 5 Stan. So he has got, well, he's the Dwarves of Erebor, so this is the one technically good aligned faction, but we're just going to have to pretend that they're the Oricani or Orosani. I can never really remember how to pronounce what the Eastern Dwarves are called, and there's next to nothing that, in terms of information that we have about them. Yeah, I mean, Lord of the Rings may be like the OG really of all the fantasy series, but it may have been the first, but it certainly wasn't the last to have a group of Eastern Dwarves that no one really knows anything about in the lore, and nothing ever really gets done with them. But here, that's how we will be viewing them. But Ironfoot Axe Throwers, I mean, from a defensive standpoint, we've seen in the last battle and a few others before that how strong Erebor can be, so that could be on the cards again today. And the Ironfoot Axe Thrower is a big part of the reason why. There's also the Ironfoot Pikes, which are a fantastic unit, probably the best unit of standard pikes in the game, just because of how well rounded their stats are, the addition of a shield and the good armour. We've got Ironfoot Warriors in there as well, Erebor Legionaries I believe. We've got a unit of the Goats as well. They're a little bit slow, the Ironfoot Hammer Guard, but because of how hefty they are, they can be very, very good against other cavalry units. Would be an interesting fight between them and the Melkor's Abominations, actually. Interesting to see if that pans out. The Dragon Slayer's trackers are in there as well. You can see those black halberds that they wear on their back. But we'll have to wait and see what the army reveals when it scatters a little bit more. Meanwhile, the force who look to be heading up this revolt, Soccer Enjoyer, is playing as Umbar, the Black Númenóreans deciding to rebel a little bit. The Corsair Blackguard, so javelins. We've already seen the axe throwers from Erebor throwing projectiles. Certainly not something the attackers will have a monopoly in. The Blackguards are a strong unit in that regard as well, decent in melee. Belagair archers, I mean, Umbar among all the factions today are going to be the most comfortable when it comes to engaging in those elongated skirmish fights, and the Belagair archers are going to be one of the main reasons why. Those hefty archers, not the most damaging, but in a good position here to dig in, and the Belagair footmen likewise when you fully upgrade their armour like this. Certainly not the most damaging unit of infantry in the world, but very, very resilient, and if you can add in some of Umbar's damage from other sources, it can make for a good combined arms front line. More Corsair Blackguards, more Belagair footmen. We've got nothing within the ruins, but just in behind it we do have some slightly more heavy duty units in the shape of the Alcarondas Legion, very good unit of men-at-arms. We've also got the Narun Aru Sentinels, who are an even stronger shielded pike variant than the Franadine Pikemen and the Ironfoot Pikes we've already seen. Very, very tanky indeed, and of course the perfect anchor for your Umbar front lines. And then we've also got the Warlords of Umbar, so certainly a cavalry presence for the defenders today, and more of a significant one perhaps than what the attackers have, depending on how you view what the Mümakil are going to be used for. And finally a trebuchet here at the back with the Trebuchet of Númenor crew, potentially devastating, but also potentially devastating to your own army. So we'll see how Umbar gets on, and likely some hidden units as well because of the Corsair presence within Umbar's roster. And last but not least, we have White Dolphin himself, who's playing as the Orcs of the Misty Mountains, some Bolgs champions. So another aggressive unit of cavalry among the Orcs, by far and away the best in terms of charge damage and, you know, having that lance cavalry. The others are all pretty much focused around being anti-cavalry cavalry. That's not the case for the Bolgs champions. They've got that anti-infantry aspect to them with the big charge. So we'll see if they can utilise that to their advantage. Something else that they have are the heavy goblin crossbows, which they can add that to what Erebor will have in that regard, and potentially Umbar as well with their Corsair variant. And crossbows, we know how deadly they can be if they're set up correctly, and that could be one of the main pillars of the Rebels' defence here. We've got plenty of goblin infantry and Moria spear guard here, so again, very, very numerous, unsurprising really from the Misty Mountains. You have to wonder what their morale is going to be like when the Mümakil start trampling over them, but as long as they've got their support units close by, in particular the cave troll drummers there, that's going to be fine. More cave troll drummers as well as standard cave trolls. So again, they're the weakest of all the trolls really, but depending on who they're up against, the damage spike might still be pretty key. We'll see how they get on against some of Harad's heavy hitters. White Orc Fearmongers, I mean, all this armour piercing isn't going to be particularly useful against Harad or Rhudaur actually, but halberds are the only polearms that the Misty Mountains have, so it's not as if there was a choice to go for pikes in their roster anyway. Black Orcs of the Mountains are a good solid unit of heavy swordsmen that can be used as well, and we mentioned them earlier. The Drake Broodlings, a living battering ram really. More awkward in some ways to deal with than the Mümakil in this sort of situation, because they tend to keep themselves more organised, weirdly enough, but they are also individually far more fragile, and they do still have a big weakness to anti-cavalry, so if they come up against any of the attacking pikes or polearms or javelins or spears, that's going to be a problem for them. But an interesting unit to have on the defence, because they're such a thoroughly aggressive presence really in terms of what they offer. I don't really think there's actually any need for too much of a cut, 'cause it's not the longest battle in the world, this sub 30k frame, so I imagine the attackers are going to get things moving pretty fast. I mean, the settlement is right there after all, 4 ways in, and yeah, we'll see how effective this advance is going to be. Let's get this show on the road, shall we? Yes, these large guys I think are going to be one of the keys behind whether or not the attackers are going to be able to make anything stick in this particular battle. Interesting to see the layout of things. I mean, certainly the goblins, perhaps not the perspective which we are seeing the battle from. They're probably more underlings or press ganged into assisting with this rebellion, but you'd imagine that Eastern Dwarves and Black Númenóreans would be the ones to maybe strike out against Sauron's influence. Sauron's primary army on the flank today under the Warlord's command as well. I mean, attacking into Erebor is probably not the opposing force you would want to. And again, all of the defending forces today are strong in their own right. I mean, we've seen Erebor be very effective very recently. The Goblins offer a very different challenge on the other side, and then Umbar probably the most well-rounded force, given the fact they are the ones that can field a little bit more of an archer force, as well as that balance between quality and numbers that they have. Again, Umbar versus Rhudaur, who would you back in that particular fight? Certainly at the high end in terms of quality, Umbar will have the edge, but Rhudaur's armour piercing is going to be pretty much universally useful against the likes of Umbar, except for the very weakest of the Corsairs, against which any old units will tend to get the job done anyway. Harad against the Misty Mountains. Harad's armour piercing is probably the key there. When you combine that with the fact that they're not going to be completely overrun in terms of numbers against a force like the Misty Mountains, maybe you would give the edge to Harad in a straight-up fight, but the defensive ground of the Misty Mountains, especially considering those crossbows, could be one of the main difference makers there. Just a solitary skeleton right in front of this position. As for Mordor Erebor, again, that's pretty much a classic quality versus quantity kind of question, albeit Mordor do have the super high-end elites that can match, if not surpass, the Dwarven factions in some cases. But overall, their rank and file on an individual level certainly not up to par when you compare them. Cavalry is always a bit of a wild card in a situation such as this as well. Just having a look at the routes in, actually 3 from the front, this sort of trident-like approach from the front of the settlement. There's quite a lot of ground for Umbar to cover all on their own. If Rhudaur maybe get a little bit of support from their allies moving up the middle, maybe that is one way in which they can go for a bit of concentration of force. Whereas the two flanks, it's only going to be one path each. Alternatively, they could try and batter their way through the attackers here. There's a lot of trolls from the Misty Mountains as well, but not up to the same sort of level as the likes of the Olag High. They do look quite intimidating when you look at them like this, though, when there are so many that the Misty Mountains can bring alongside their very numerous army. It's the sort of thing which can look intimidating for quite a while and then can fall apart all of a sudden, though, so that will be White Dolphin's task in this battle. Can they withstand the savage attacks of the Haradrim? Similar sort of situation that Umbar are going to be in up against Rhudaur. Some more troll hunters in the front, which is interesting. Trollshot axe throwers revealing themselves as well, not too surprising to see them throwing axes with the hefty damage that they can dish out. Umbar pretty well placed to resist it for the most part, but there's no getting around the fact that when you get into the kind of damage values that axe throwers have, they're going to be a problem for whomever it may concern. Orc fodder on the way forward. I mean, 3 units of Orc fodder is a fairly hefty proportion of a Mordor army, and they're certainly not going to be up to the task of taking on the Erebor dwarves in a straight up fight. So we'll see on that score. Melkor's abominations. For Mordor, I think the key is really going to be when they choose to push forward with the Blackguard of Barad-dûr and then solidify them in place with all the other infantry they do have. Morgul Chosen will be able to capitalise on those gains, and the Uruk Halberds can make sure they stay there, but for the most part, looking at this Mordor army, I mean, they don't have a huge amount of truly damaging infantry in melee, not of the level that they would potentially want against the dwarves. I mean, moving through here, the one area where their orc fodder will be useful is potentially absorbing crossbow bolts, but if the dwarven army is in place and paying attention, they won't be using crossbow bolts on something as lowly as fodder. Mümakil off to the side for the time being, with the attacking army so far stacking up. I mean, some of these Rhudaur units are a little bit far away, potentially, seeing as they're not going to be, unless Umbar was put their skirmishers on the ramps themselves, they wouldn't be anywhere near in range anyway. It's one way in which the attackers could use the geography of the front of this settlement to their own advantage if they elect to move a little bit closer. Both Rhudaur and Umbar may have to stretch themselves a little thin. Those Ironfoot Hammer Guard could yet see them in a straight up fight against the Abominations, 2 very similar cavalry units. For axe throwers and crossbows, this is a pretty brutal approach, to be honest, for Mordor to advance now. This is one of those instances where I'd probably recommend, if I were the warlord, sending a token force in here, maybe of the fodder, and a couple of better units like the Morgul Chosen, but send enough support to be meaningful to Rhudaur so they can try and punch their way through Umbar, who have probably got less of a devastating close-range skirmish force than Erebor do. This is where Erebor's lack of archers doesn't really concern them. Uruk archers will try and skirmish in, and that's all well and good, but Erebor will have the ability to resist that kind of damage. Atomor's troll hunters and trollshot axe throwers creeping their way forwards, but again, as soon as they round the corner, the Belagire archers will have no qualms about opening up on them immediately. And exactly the same thing will happen on the other side as well. This is one of those instances where at least 2 of these pathways for Rhudaur needs to be an active attacking lane. Otherwise Umbar will be able to concentrate their fire, and that is exactly what they will want in this sort of situation. Harad starting to creep their way forwards now as well. We'll keep an eye on that. Surely Mordor are going to be the first ones into the breach, so to speak. Given the fact that their armies are pretty much directly having a staring contest now with the dwarves. Fine for Hammerguard, I mean, axe throwers, the Temple Guard firing in as well. They've actually got a pretty decent angle here. It may be in their interests as well to actually target the Ironfoot pikes. As soon as they round the corner, of course, the crossbows will open up on them after all, but these pikes are going to be a problem for Mordor. The only other way they can really punch through them is with the Great Shields and the Trolls, but as soon as they do that, they're pretty much committed to going all in, so if they do want to go for a slightly slower, slightly more cautious approach, maybe that is the answer. Time will tell. Still no real movement from Rhudaur. Harad now in the same sort of position that Mordor were in over on the other side, and they too have the crossbows to deal with, albeit the Misty Mountains crossbows will be easier to kill at longer ranges because they lack the armour and shields on the backs that the dwarves enjoy, allowing them to shrug off these attacks, and Hashari Stalkers being the ones to target the crossbows down. That's a good choice, I think, from Tintin, because that will force the crossbows to retreat, because they certainly have the damage. The regular Harad archers maybe not, because they're so lowly in terms of their own quality. Things falling silent once again over here. This has got all the makings of a battle where everything's going to happen all at once, really, which is probably the way that both sides would want to play it. Trebuchet of Numenor is over here. Maybe the narrower nature of this attacking lane and also the high ground that you can put your trebuchet on makes it a better place to use it than the front. It does mean that Umbar are without a large monetary value's worth of resources on their own front, however, so Rhudaur should be looking at that and thinking that things are going to be a little bit more open for them, but they're lagging behind a little bit still. Their allies are starting to get into the sort of position now where an attack looks ever more likely. Harad, maybe over here Harad have got the better units in their army to take advantage of the kind of defence that the defenders wanted to enact. Good damage being done, but yeah, Harad's starting to filter forwards with their infantry now. And Haradrim Spearmen are not really the sort of unit that are going to attract the attention of crossbow bolts either, for much the same reasons the Orc Fodder are always going to be unlikely to do that on the other side. Southron Pikemen would be the sort of thing that regular archers would not mind a go at though, but of course the Misty Mountains don't really have that in their repertoire. Shari Stalkers and regular Southron archers though, so far, considering the amount that Tintin has brought, he needed to be able to get some decent value with them, and this is the sort of situation that is going to allow him to do that, and I think White Dolphin sees that, because starting to use the crossbow bolts now, a real case of use it or lose it. But Harad's certainly getting the upper end of this particular skirmish fight so far. Etamor's Troll Hunters poking their heads around the corner, immediately being sent packing by the Belagire archers. That's got all the makings of a slow burn kind of fight. Meanwhile over here, oof. And immediately the Umbar Trebuchet taking a really hefty chunk out of these Mordor units, and the Uruk Halberds are a unit that they would certainly want to be preserving. Some Ironfoot warriors did move forward temporarily before retreating once more. The Halberds moving forward, but they will absolutely be needing to get into formation if they want to have any sort of chance against the dwarves that are before them. Crossbows starting to open up now as well. Ardenheim's shadow bows poking their heads around the corner. We saw the Harad Rangers have some pretty good luck on the other side, but the terrain here is maybe a little bit less favourable to Mordor to do that sort of thing. So the crossbows immediately sending those Mordor support units packing, and this has not been a great start for Mordor, as much as Harad seem to have had a pretty decent opening salvo against the Misty Mountains. Mordor going to lose some of their entry-level infantry units and not really able to get their own support up and running in the same way. The crossbows content to be pretty patient with things as well. And that trebuchet, as I mentioned, that trebuchet being over there should be the green light to Rhudaur, but you get the impression that Rhudaur will want to be a little bit more cautious with it, but you've got to be careful as the attackers, because if you do that and your allies are attacking and your allies end up losing handily, essentially all you've done is allowed the enemy to concentrate their forces on you in the long run, and you've waited too long and the opportunity may pass. The melee fight meanwhile getting underway on this side as well. Tintin advancing with the Haradrim spearmen, albeit the Moria Spearguard do have the advantage there. They certainly will when the trolls get involved, and Southron pikemen are not going to be the best placed unit to be dealing with the trolls. This is where Harad are going to need some slightly more dangerous units up close. The javelins will help. Muhard Berserkers maybe a little bit flimsy to deal with trolls, but the damage will be useful. Victory seeming certain for the Goblin Infantry and Moria Spearguard on the front line after some difficult opening moments. Managing to get the few remaining crossbows after those initial complications behind the wall, and they will actually have some good shots into the back of those Harad units, and actually immediately the spears routing, although that's probably less to do with the crossbows and more to do with the trolls. And the cave trolls coming down here as well, so the Misty Mountains may be sensing a bit of an opportunity to do the same that Erebor are doing on the other side to Mordor, to utterly crush the first wave without too much of a response. And again, they do need these numbers really. Harad. Muhard Beast Hunters are going to be flinging their javelins in. I mean, they'll certainly be hitting. Goblins will probably die under the weight of those javelins. The trolls, though, it'll only be some entry-level damage. Ashari Stalkers. So Harad are returning fire. They're giving as good as they get here. Firing into the backfield. White Uruk Fearmongers being identified as a target that the Haradrim would rather not be dealing with later on. The arrows continue to rain down. Meanwhile, Rhudaur showing no signs of advancing over there, but the Trollshot Axe Throwers moving forward once again. Try and do some skirmishing, but the Belagair archers will definitely have the better end of this because of the point-blank nature of things. The fact that Trollshot Axe Throwers, even though their damage is far superior to the archers, their own armour is not particularly fantastic, and this is also going to be pretty painful for them. Close range charge in conjunction with those arrows. That's a good point actually, no Rhudaur clansmen on the field today. So the Etamor's Troll Hunters as spears and the Hranadine Pikemen are really the only proper defence against the Warlords, but again, if you see those kinds of units being committed, it's a sign that Rhudaur are going all in, and that does not seem to be the case thus far. Mordor, meanwhile, on the other hand, to be fair, the first little assault is still ongoing. Mordor haven't lost anything of too much note yet, but after a certain period of time, sheer amount of losses becomes notable in its own right. Another unit of halberds on the way forward. The javelins just in behind, going to be trying to find an angle to use, but that in conjunction with the halberds being here is enough to convince the Erebor crossbows to start firing once again, and the Ironfoot Axe Thrower is also going to do the same, which is certainly going to make life exceedingly uncomfortable on the front. Ironfoot Pikes being sent forward. That will re-solidify the front line, because a fair amount of numbers now. The warriors still seem fairly comfortable, but the Pikes will just make sure of that. This is where those shields from the Ironfoot Pikes are going to be earning their keep as well. Not against the javelins so much, but certainly against the archers. They'll get into melee with certainly enough of them left to make the difference, you would think. Over here, meanwhile, Snow Trolls still happy on the front line. Plenty of Moria Spearguard and Goblin Infantry still doing their thing. I mean, the Serpent Guard up close and personal like this, certainly will be more than a match for dealing with all of the goblins, but in the centre of the line like this, they won't be too thrilled about fighting the trolls. But again, the Muhard Berserkers, all of those little things adding up. I do think Harad of all the attackers so far have probably been the most well drilled and the most effective, but then they have also been using an awful lot of their ranged power as well. Again, that use it or lose it mentality. If you use it now, even if your army ends up utterly vanquished, your allies will still reap the benefits of that. If those drummers will necessarily be in range, I mean, it's hard to tell when you don't see what the actual radius of the drummers is. To be fair, the Misty Mountains don't seem to be struggling mentally at the moment, so maybe it's fine. Again, still not much happening from the Rhudaur perspective. This is dangerous. Again, I know that these aren't the most appealing of attacking lanes to be going up, but neither are the ones that your allies are having to use either. Again, this could end up paying off if the defenders end up losing too much at the hands of Mordor and Harad. Rhudaur could be the ones to clean up as a result of that. But if they don't, if Erebor and the Misty Mountains are able to get some pretty decent victories under their belt, I don't really see what Rhudaur can do in the face of that. And Dragon Slayer's now moving forward in response to the Olakai and the Nazgul. I mean, the Nazgul will certainly be enough to make the difference against the Ironfoots. And the commitment of these high-end units is almost certainly why the Dragon Slayers are now on station. Interesting to see that the Dwarven skirmishes are now taking a bit of a step back. But so too are the Olakai, so a bit of a game of cat and mouse between the dwarves and the orcs over here. Some of the Olakai, however, are not going to be able to escape melee, and I mean, you can see when the trolls get isolated, even though they just entered melee, against a foe like the Dragon Slayers, they will fall. Barbarian catapult now in place, and we've already seen the Umbar artillery do some good work. Is it the turn of Rhudaur's artillery to help out their allies? Not really. Certainly more kills on their allies, albeit they did get quite a lot of kills on the Dragon Slayer, so you'd say that's probably worth it considering most of the friendly fire was fodder and javelins, but still. That also increases the likelihood of this front line completely collapsing, and you certainly don't want to be hitting the Nazgul. Over on this side, Southron archers starting to, well, the Harajam spearmen are fleeing. Southrons are still fighting the good fight. Beast Hunters in melee looking like they could rout at any moment. The Shari Stalkers in melee now, so I mean, using all their ammunition is technically a good thing. They'll be pretty happy with that. I mean, in melee as well, they'll be just fine against the goblins, especially with that good melee defense that rangers tend to have. But again, it's the snow trolls that are the problem, and even though damage is being done, you would suggest it's not really at the correct rate. Harad need to try and up their game in that regard. Could have been the moment to send forward at least one of the Trollmen class of units. And again, yeah, I'd say standard Trollmen probably should have been sent forward as well, given the Troll's presence. Yeah, the crossbows are there, but you already did the hard bit really of whittling the crossbows down to the point where they were less of a threat for the Misty Mountains, so there's maybe a little bit more of a red carpet rolled out for Harad in that respect, but in the end, maybe not taking advantage of their own good work as much as they could have. Rhudaur still too far away from the settlement in my liking. Probably the biggest cardinal sin of all the attacks. I don't want to keep banging on about that, but the longer they leave it, the riskier that becomes. Arrows raining down from the Uruk archers, not eliciting a response in the same way that something like the Temple Guard would certainly garner. Olakai, meanwhile, rejoining the front line alongside a unit of Morgul chosen. So I mean, the temperature is going to be turned up on Erebor now. Stronger units of regular infantry being committed. There's still the matter of the halberdiers as well. How are the Nazgul doing on the front line? There's still 10, no 7 of them, so they've even been taking some damage. Ironfoot Hammer Guard going to charge into anything that breaches the gap, and now the Blackguard of Barad-dûr are moving forward. So this is the moment where Mordor surely are going all in, because there's no way that the dwarves will be able to solidify that front line in time to stop this push. Reserve units of Ironfoot warriors will move forward now, and the Blackguard of Barad-dûr, clock is ticking for them now, but the gains that they're making, that's why the Morgul chosen are here. The Olag High will be able to feast upon the dwarves that are now going to get completely cut off from support, and the dwarven skirmish has been caught a little bit flat-footed as well. Not necessarily in the best position to do a lot of damage in response to this, and artillery getting a good amount of damage done on them as well. These units are not terrible in melee either, so that could prove to be a real gain for them as the battle goes on. This is a bit of a moment of ascendancy potentially for Mordor. Erebor scrambling to respond to this now. Temple Guard also in place. Now that the immediate threat of the prepared crossbows is gone, they will be able to do their thing as well. You can see the numbers of the Blackguard of Barad-dûr tumbling, but they've certainly done their job at this point. They'll be very, very happy with how that went. Mordor, or Erebor I should say, have managed to set up another good defensive position, and that's in a good position for the crossbows to take advantage of as well. So if they can keep and maintain their position here, Erebor, that initial moment of panic should dissipate, but I mean, we'll see. Bolg's champions charging in to try and deal with the Blackguard of Barad-dûr that did make it this far. Problem is, those crossbows may be in a good position to shoot into the back of this front line now, but they're also in a perfect position for that catapult to just do some raking shots up the line, enough to rout dwarven units as well. Goes to show how effective that shot was, so a good moment there for Rhudaur as well. And then over here, what are Harad doing? Still caught up in the same position. Still the trolls doing the heavy lifting, and still more goblins being put around them to make sure this front line stays as strong as it reasonably can. Fearmongers potentially looking at being committed to the front line as well, although now the Mümakil are on the way forwards. So a similar story on the other side. The Blackguard of Barad-dûr, although they're just parking themselves in here, but they should just be able to waltz through the front line really. The issue they may run into though is the White Uruks are here, Spearguard are in there. The Trolls actually will do a pretty decent amount of damage to the Mümakil as well, so I don't see this being as effective as the Blackguard were on the other side, unless they start doing some of their area of effect attacks, but that's where the Mümakil can slightly betray you, although there they go. That's going to be pretty devastating. You see there that pretty much 30 fell in a single swing of the tusks, and not a single one of them has fallen yet. Now they will, however. Hard to tell really how effective these bits of damage are going to be in the long run. There is another unit of Mümakil, let's not forget, so this isn't the be-all and end-all for Harad's attempts at doing this, but maybe just trying to make something happen in terms of damage. But in the end, I think what they have succeeded in doing is getting the Fearmongers and the Cave Trolls committed, which, from a Harad perspective now, the Trollmen need to go in. Because otherwise this will have all certainly been for naught. Southron Archers in melee are certainly not going to be the answer, and a single unit of Serpent Guard being the reinforcements here is probably not going to be enough either. Looking at the minimap though, it is still the two flanks that are doing the business. That Barbarian Catapult getting, again, some pretty decent angles on the Dwarven units. The Troll Drummers from Mordor though ending up going the way of the Dodo. Dragon Slayer's Trackers, this has been, ooh, again, more Grizzly friendly fire, but again, decent hits. You could say this is worthwhile as long as Mordor can maintain their numbers to a certain extent. If they can't, then they're in trouble. Dragon Slayer's Trackers, both sides really doing huge damage to one another, and actually the Temple Guard straying a little bit too close because the Dragon Slayer's Trackers really whittled them down. There's a Reforged that got largely flattened by the catapult. Umbar retreating some of their units as well. More arrow fire coming in, so you get the impression actually that both sides are starting to look a little bit thin on the ground. Who will be happiest with a dead rubber over here? And even then I think Erebor will have a little bit left that they can commit to reinforce other parts of the field. Drake Broodlings are there also. Meanwhile, ooh, the second unit of Mümakil were committed forwards and ended up perishing. At the hands of what? The crossbows? It doesn't look like they got into melee, really. Did they hover around behind the lines and allow the crossbows to shoot them? That would be a bit of a shocker if so. Worrying signs, although Rhudaur are sending some of their units over here now, so more active on the flanks, which is good to see, and they will do a decent amount of damage, especially to those White Oak Fearmongers, although the Umbar Trebuchet, which reared its head on the other side of the battlefield as well, is now doing the same to the Harad assault also. The longer those trolls stay up, the more damage Harad is going to have to withstand. I mean, I think they should have committed the trollmen earlier, but they are coming forward now, and the fact that they are all still in perfect health is something that the defenders are going to have to deal with in its entirety all at once. Are they going to be able to do that? I mean, Umbar is still pretty healthy because of the far slower nature, in fact non-existent nature largely, of the attack from the front, but as long as Rhudaur continue to support their allies here, that is going to be the play, and then maybe attack through the middle when more of the resources have been allocated elsewhere. Interesting to see the Drake Broodlings on this side of the field as well. Again, being turned back now. Support from their allies coming in is going to make the dwarves' job at fully repelling Mordor just that little bit more likely. The catapult is really the main danger here, and I think Erebor sense that, which is why they're going to be sending forward this unit of Ironfoot warriors to try and go behind enemy lines and silence it. And they are going to make it by the looks of things, which is pretty impressive. Great Broodlings forcing their way through the line as well. Yeah, there's not really much to stop them. Temple Guard are there, but not in the kind of numbers any longer. Routing, so Mordor looks like they're going to be completely vanquished here. Nice point blank shot into the Ironfoot warriors, and they are shaken now. The catapult crew will probably be able to deal with the warriors as a result, but that's going to be their last action, because surely more dwarven infantry is going to follow, and they are going to stop them from firing again as well, so that is good. Drake Broodlings being joined now by the Erebor Legionaries. They're going to shut down the Ardenheim Shadow Bows and then surely bring down the loyalist Black Númenóreans here, fighting under Sauron's banner today. They'll have to fight and die for Sauron. They will not be seeing the end of the battle no matter how it goes. Speaking of which, I don't know if his Southron subordinates are going to do a huge amount better. I mean, the Demons of the Desert are here. They're going after the Bolgs champions. I think at this point you need to be trying to target the infantry corps if you can, because with the Alcarondas Legion committing some support over here, that is going to solidify things somewhat. And surely, I mean, Rhudaur swordsmen are still making up the front line. What happened to the Trollman? There they are. They're taking far too long to commit these heavy hitters. I can appreciate what Rhudaur were trying to do. I mean, there goes the Mordor general. Rhudaur being more conservative in the middle is all fine and good, considering it was part of a larger plan, but there is a bit of a theme developing of the attackers being too reticent to use their force. Starting to move forward with some numbers now. Trollshaw axe throwers with a good opportunity actually to shoot into the backs of the Alcarondas Legion with the Rhudaur swordsman there, but again, that archer support, stuff like the Corsair Blackguards and Corsair crossbows have also been yet to be utilised by Umbar. That's some pretty heavy hitting range support going into the late game, which is always a good sign for defenders. Pretty nasty point blank shot from the Trollshore axe throws, but the shields will help the Alcarondas Legion. The issue is going to be that there are now units in behind enemy lines. Will the Warlords be able to get a charge? It's kind of awkward terrain. No, the Lances were down, so they did. And now defeat seems certain. The Blackguard's going to be engaging them on foot as well. That's going to be a tough one to swallow. They're going to rout with them, and the Alcarondas Legion will last longer on the front line. I mean, they're going to get overrun here, but they will buy Umbar a bit of time to reorganise a defence. Black Wolves revealing themselves from hiding. They're a dangerous foe for Umbar to have to deal with. Meanwhile, dying embers of the fight over here, really. Still a couple of Temple Executioners from their push forward, which was ultimately in vain from a Mordor perspective. And the catapult now, Rhudaur were the only ones left. Mordor effectively completely destroyed. And Harad going to be heavily dependent on their Trollman, their pride and joy, to get themselves over the line here. Heavy gobbo crossbows. Still 11 of them, considering the beating they took earlier on. They'll be not too displeased with that. If the Demons of the Desert still have ammunition, again, that's the sort of thing that you want to be using if you can. Axe throwers making their way over here in response to the Trollman, who are gaining the upper hand against the Umbar forces over here. So Harad's last effort with all of their very best units, their most dangerous force, is going to be interesting. Some Dwarven units making their way across. Ironfoot Pikes is a hell of a thing to have access to in the late game as well. Umbar, their Blackguards and another unit of Alcarondas Legion having to stand firm against the Rhudaur assault, which is now attacking through the centre. The main gates, or main entrance at the very least, to the settlement. Rhudaur pikemen. Again, those Balagire archers getting good consistent damage. They don't do a lot of damage quickly, but over a period of time, given the sightlines they've been afforded, that damage will add up. Shields or no on the Rhudaur pikemen. Blackguards will be hoping they can get in place to use their certainly more deadly javelins, with their own pikes arriving on the front line as well, and Aru sentinels. Rhudaur cannot rely on having the edge in that regard. As well to advance in behind, but Harbingers of Castamere blocking the advance of the Rhudaur swordsmen and the Warlords charging through the backs of them. I mean, surely that's going to be another routing unit. Rhudaur actually among the evil men do have slightly better morale, but there's a limit to how far that's going to take you when you're taking the kind of punishment that they are here. Goblin infantry alongside the men from the southern coast. Also crossbows as well. They will have to deal with another advance, but they're running out of these, I think, the attackers. If one of these can stick, then they could force their way through the settlements as a whole and make the difference. This is a more basic front line, but it is still solid against regular units. You could argue the Black Wolves maybe should have been leading the way. Cave Troll Drummers. Demons of the Desert getting singled out by the crossbows and the Ironfoot axe throwers. That's a real loss. It's a huge damage spike that's being denied to Harad. Occasional crossbow bolts still ripping through the air as well. Defeat seems certain for the Black Uruks. That is the time limit that they are working on here, all of these supporting units for the defenders, because all of these Trollmen will still be able to overcome the Black Uruks, which are standing in their way, and that could be true of the nearby defensive line of Umbar and the Misty Mountains over here as well, given the numbers, but at least over here, full ammunition on the Corsair crossbows and a lower quality of attacking units in general anyway, so probably going to be okay on this lane as well. Black Walls will ask a few more questions, but surely they'll be the target of the Corsair crossbows as well. And we got to get some more Belagaya footmen in as well now that they know no one's going to be coming through the middle, because that's everything committed. So another unit of spears just to keep everything in place for the Corsairs to really go to town on that front line. Erebor's Troll Hunters still a unit which they can commit forwards. Rhudaur's heaviest presence was over here, but it was also pretty heavily telegraphed, so Umbar were able to respond in kind. Still their best units ready to be committed forwards. Throwing axes going to do some damage to the Warlords, but the Warlords have already made a bit of a mess of Rhudaur's advance up here. Again, a rear charge, or at least barreling through the backs of these units. You need those high tiers closer to the action than this. Castamir's Rangers now in place as well, taking the place of the Belagaya archers that were up here previously. A more damaging variant to deal with the better armour of the Erebor's Troll Hunters. That's going to be the end of them. The Berserkers and the Enslavers will surely suffer the same fate. Blackwall's able to get in behind the lines. They will be bloodied pretty heavily as a result of doing this, but I guess desperate times call for desperate measures now. They need something to go their way. The attackers, and fairly quickly, Harbingers of Castamere turning back around. I think the initial plan was to reinforce this front line, but with the pikes and the Bolg's champions here, and yeah, those crossbows and throwing axes have certainly done the business as well. So what was looking like a pretty ropey front line initially, from a pure melee perspective, has been locked down pretty effectively by the defenders now. And those Ironfoot pikes will only solidify that, so they'll win with something to spare over here as well. Trebuchet of Numenor still there. The crew itself, something else to bear in mind. I mean, surely from here it's too big an ask for the attackers to come back into it now. The announcer would agree. Fighting in and amongst the carcasses of the Mümakil. The first one was able to get some good AoE attacks, but the second one needed to go above and beyond even that, and it ended up doing far less by the looks of things. There goes the Harad general, killed by one of the Black Uruks. Harbingers of Castamere moving over here, which did look to be, again, the only real point of danger left, but pinning them in place now with those crossbows as well. Even with those javelins raining down from on high from the Erebor's Troll Hunters, it's not really with an ideal angle. I'm pretty sure Umbar would have taken this fight. The other unit, Rhudaur pikemen, not really gaining anything more than the first. What's happening now? Are they trying to reposition? I mean, they are, but there's no camouflage for this anymore. This was always what I was a little bit worried about. Like, it's very clear where these units are going to be going and what they're going to be doing. Consolidation may be your best hope given the quality of those units at this point. So you could maybe see why. Yeah, I just don't think they're going to be able to overcome. Corsair crossbowmen out of ammunition. They've certainly done their bit. Just going to be getting involved in melee now as well, adding mass to the front line. Belagaya archers, Naruna Aru sentinels. The other units of them going to be solidifying things from the front. I mean, to be fair, the Rhudaur pikemen are not under immediate crossbow fire anymore, so the pikes will be a welcome sight on the front line for Umbar, but I mean, if the Rangers of Castamere have ammunition left anyway, then they're going to be put under more threat anyway. Marching towards the final 1,000 frames. Yeah, surely too much of a discrepancy now. What's left over here? I mean, it looks like it is the remnants of the Champions of Nafra. Indeed, there's one. being dealt with by a few black Uruks. So it is just the one front line really where there's a genuine fight happening, and now the Bolgs champion's going to escape into the open field, and surely now they're going to go... Yeah, there's no escape. You see him turn around with his units immediately. I mean, to be fair, the Witch Realm Enslavers will slaughter a unit of cavalry pretty quickly. But as soon as the Witch Realm Enslavers reach the front, of course, the Bolgs champions can simply turn around and do some hammer and anvil strikes on what remains of the infantry up here, if they so choose. Looks like they are going to charge down the hill there. Bold move indeed. Ooh, what was that? Trebuchet of Numenor, I mean, actually getting a very good hit. Managing to avoid friendly fire despite the overwhelming edge they had on the front line. So fair play, considering, you know, we have seen our fair share of friendly fire today. Mostly from Rhudaur's artillery, but even that was still pretty good. Dingda King admitting defeat before his bodyguard units really get into melee as well. I mean, obviously they stood no chance of winning, but yeah, waiting too long. That is definitely, I would say, the moral of the story here for the attackers. Waiting too long to commit their big shiny toys. And in the end, all of them ended up being relatively ineffectual. I mean, the Trollmen did pretty well initially on the front line, but they were ultimately bullied as well by crossbows and throwing axes. Certainly Rhudaur, I mean, they ended up not really getting into melee at all. And there they go. The end. And a well-deserved victory by the attackers, because, I mean, as much as I think the defenders hesitated far too much to commit their heavy hitters, maybe not so much the Warlord, but then the Warlord was also focused down a little bit more as a result of that, because I think he was the only one really doing it, which may be why he had far less kills, but he was also up against Erebor, who weren't as numerous as the Misty Mountains, which goes some way to describing why Harad have got their kills. But one thing I think the defenders did really well was the use of their resources. You know, they held their front lines pretty well, and then they used their range support sparingly, but still, like, well. They were able to have a consistent supply of ammunition. Obviously, all of them had access to good crossbows, which is always going to be a bit of a threat to attacking armies, but that's just something you have to deal with as the attackers. And initially, Harad did well against the Misty Mountains. It just didn't really retain that across the whole battle, to be honest. And I think that's the key. I think the defenders very much deserving because of that, and also the attackers. There are certainly some things they could have improved in this battle as well. Being a little bit more forthright. But yeah, well played to the defenders. See what did the damage for the Misty Mountains, which, I mean, to be fair, that's a hefty amount of kills as well. But again, the two most numerous armies were duking it out against one another, so that's not terribly surprising either. Bolgs champions did well. Snow Trolls getting 558 kills. We mentioned how they were alive on the front line for too long. A lot of this would have been against Muhards and basic Southrons, but still, that's a big return. And not enough quality was sent against them early to try and stop them from reaching these heights. The Cave Trolls less so, but then they were up against slightly more effective opposition, including the Mümakil, of course. Heavy Goblin crossbows did well, of course. The White Uruk Fearmongers also very effective on the front line at holding it, as you would expect. No kills from the two Cave Troll drummer units, but then they were also kept out of melee, I think, for the whole battle, so that would go some way to describing why. And then the Drake Broodlings also, albeit they were at their most effective against Mordor on the other side of the field, which also shows, I think, that the interplay between the defenders was a little bit more effective because they were able to support one another more effectively than the attackers were. Admittedly, when you're the attackers in this sort of situation, it's harder because if you see something going wrong, you have to react to it more quickly because you've got more ground to cover. But even so, I mean, it's not as if they didn't do that. The attackers, Rhudaur, did commit reinforcements to help Harad and Mordor, but by that point things were already looking a little bit ropey. And yeah, I think that the right outcome in this battle, not a hugely one-sided affair, but certainly a well-deserved victory in the end, I think. So yeah, nice to see a sort of Civil War-style battle as well, and Sauron being thrown off, so the Black Númenórean / Eastern Dwarf Rebellion will continue in this little alternative timeline. So yeah, big thank you to White Dolphin for sending this one in. This is the first one he sent me way back when, like I mentioned, so this is sort of the beginning of me trying to clear a bit of a backlog that was sent to me long ago. I mean, the Cardland Outpost and Grimslade ones from him were also sent from a little time ago, but that was just me getting back into things. Now it's a more earnest and organised effort to try and clear the backlog, and this is pretty much where it started, so we'll be going in more or less chronological order with these from here. So yeah, don't worry, I will get to them. I think White Dolphin and Hidden were the two that sent me the most in that time, so we will try and get through all of them if we can. And yeah, I think the next one up is going to be a beach landing one, or it might end up being one that was in the Haradrim Desert. I can't quite remember. I did have a quick leaf through all of them, but yeah, I mean, we'll just wait and see when I sit down to record my next session, because this is the last one of the day. So yeah, big thank you once again. Hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.